What's up, my friends? Scarpo here. Let's talk about racism for a minute. I figured I'd tackle this subject only because it just came up in discussion I was having with someone, and I don't talk about these things as hot-button topics or issues. There are plenty of people out there who make videos just specifically to get attention and to rile people up into arguing about things. And it's partially the same reason why I don't make them. Comment sections can be toxic. So I'm going to try to keep this simple and to the point of where I'm coming from. Does racism exist? Of course it does. You've got to be a fucking moron to say that racism doesn't exist, or that somehow the U.S. has come out of our racist shell and that we see each other for who we truly are now. Racism is deep. It runs culturally in our veins through our history. In other words, it takes a lot longer for us to mentally overcome our judgment of others based on their color if we're not willing to really look at why we judge. And often judgment is different than being biased or racist. So in other words, it's like a discussion that I would use to people is when people say, I'm not a racist. And I say, well, you grew up in a white town. Let's just say you were walking down some alley in a state you didn't know, in a bad part of town, and you saw a white guy in a suit walking up. You'd be probably less suspect than you would if some black gangster was walking past you. Why? Just because of the history of guys in white suits physically attacking people compared to gangsters physically attacking people. Is it a black or a white thing? Well, if you saw a white gangster, you'd probably be scared of him too. And if you saw a white dude dressed like a gangster, the idea is that we're trying to hide this, this initial judgment that we have, which is a protective measure we have. It's something that helps us to protect ourselves, rather, Judging is a way of protecting, and it just so happens that color becomes part of that judgment because of our impressions of how other cultures are or whatnot. I'm really just speaking very vaguely here, so don't get me wrong in saying that, oh, everyone's going to judge everyone. I've never had an issue with people of color. It's not been a major part of my life as far as standing up or against anyone for any personal genetics or heritage. I've always felt like, as an individual, I need to speak to protect those who have less clout or less protection. It's kind of hard to define, but when I was younger, my friend was a part Native American, and he really took to that. It attracted him a lot that he had that native blood, and so he read a lot about Native Americans, and his great-grandfather was part of a Blackfoot tribe. And so through him, I learned a lot about it. He read a book called Rolling Thunder, and he would read parts to me and show me things that he'd learned. And I was always fascinated with, Native American culture. I find it, amazingly connected, and one of the most connected to the earth cultures, that has ever existed on this planet that we know of. But then, of course, there are several different tribes. When you try to divide it down, like somebody will say, well, weren't tribes fighting among each other for land? In other words, to try to get to the point, I guess I should give you the reason why I made this video. Somebody left a comment earlier, and just a simple comment, said, do you believe in justice? And I didn't know what it was relating to, so I said justice. I said, not if it's served by man, but it depends on what you mean by justice. And so his response was, do you believe you white people should have to pay for what you've done to black and Native Americans? My response was, I've never done anything to blacks or Native Americans. How dare you bring my my color into it to say that somehow I should be liable for what ancestors did? And I was trying to think of an example. It's like akin to being a child in a family. And let's just say I can't even think of a good example because nothing compares. Something even as simple as, you're fighting for some cause, and then your parents, somebody finds out your parents are for the cause that you're fighting, and you get lumped in with them because they're your parents. Well, your family, you're part of the problem. Or you're with a group of friends I don't want to come up with examples because there are no examples as raw as racism itself, which isn't always driven by a hatred for any other culture. But it's a huge difference to say, look at what you've done to a culture, and to tell someone, because of the color of your skin, you should be making amends. It's people call it reverse discrimination. There are a lot of different terms for it. To me, it's just plain ignorance. The idea that a person should have to pay in any way, shape, or form. And the question I would ask would be, what is a payback? What should be the repercussions? So let's just take when people say that Native Americans need to, or Native Americans or Black Americans need to be, I guess what's the word that we're looking for? Paid off is the way I see it. You know, there are people who believe in these, that if we throw money, you know, at people that have been wronged because their ancestors were wronged by our ancestors, that somehow this is going to solve the problem. It won't. All it's going to do is cause more anxiety and frustration among people who have spent their lives working, and say, why should my tax money go to people that have the same equality as I do and the same rights in today's world as I do? And then people will get into but there's stereotyping and there's judgment, and look at what the police have been doing to, you know, the blacks, and then you find out, well, the police do that to whites too, and then you try to mention some facts and figures, and people shut down and they say, no, you're just racist. I don't get this myself, I don't get accused of being a racist, but I see it so many times with people who are merely trying to state some facts and figures to say, look, we tend to pick out the cases where it seems like racism is the strongest. I've been under the impression for many years of my life that racism is, let's just say, much worse than it actually is within, say, the police force or within, you know, black communities. It's gone to the point where, you know, actually I saw a video earlier of these cops. There's a guy named Donut Operator, and he's a YouTuber, and he's an ex-cop, and the guy's smart. He has a really good speaking voice, and he stands up for the cops, and shows the full story of how people are going off on cops saying this was racist or this was racially motivated. But there was one where there was some white chick that had a joint in her pocket, and she said that they were being racist against her because she was white in a black neighborhood. I mean, it's just absurdity how people use racism as any type of a scapegoat to, you know, say, well, I did a crime or I'm doing something wrong, but it must be the color of the skin. And it gets very frustrating because, yes, there is a lot of racism out there. Now, I should definitely address the issue at hand, which is that, you know, humans have always withdrawn into their groups. It's always been this way. I don't see a world where there's a black house and a white house and a black house and a white house and everyone's happily mingling with every other race and culture, because what that does is as for people can, but for individuals, it strips away some of their own culture that they may want to preserve. Not always. I'm just giving it's very difficult to talk about these things without somebody being offended. But, you know, in today's world, too many people are offended. And offense has just become another excuse to berate someone else about what they believe, or, you know, to tell someone else, no, you're wrong, you're just a racist. And I was almost on that other side. I could see how people were using racially charged and motivated tactics towards each other. But it's grown to cringeworthy status right now, the way people are using race as a trump card. No, I did not mean to use that word as a pun. In fact, I shouldn't use that word anymore. When all else fails, play the victim. And sometimes people are the victim. So when folks play the victim and they're not a victim, then what they're doing is they're stripping away the potential for other people who truly are victimized to speak their minds. When everyone acts like a victim, then no one feels sorry for each other anymore, and we come to a head in this society where we're at right now, where it's like people can't say anything without offending someone. And it's not just racism, obviously. I just wanted to tackle that in this specific video. But it's always the other person is somehow part of the enemy team. It's always that, you know, what are reparations, I guess is what I would ask. What are fair reparations for a culture that had been destroyed in the past, or from groups of people who were slaves, you know. What is fair? What is right? And where does it stop? Where does it end? When do we move forward? When do we realize that you're not going to be able to force people to see each other equally? That we're not going to be able to make laws and regulations and rules against speech to keep people from saying things? That the more you obscure people's freedom of speech and the more you tell people what not to do, often it's exactly what they do. And I think we all know this. So, just like anything else, you don't force a kid to enjoy something or learn something. You give them a reason to why they want to. And the same way with the way we treat one another. We have to give each other a reason to treat each other with respect. And this is going to take time. The internet's young. And the internet is what's brought us this connection that we have now, that gives us, not one of us, not one of you out there who is within my age realm, say anybody who evolved with the internet, you remember how the world was pictured through the media. And now you see how the world's pictured through the internet media. It's pretty much the same. It's like get as much as attention on the harshest things as you can and get people angry, and then they'll be paying attention. And as this fades, we realize that the world isn't quite as horrible as we were told it was. Let's just put it that way. That it's not just constant bombs falling and terror everywhere. That most of this is caused by very specific groups and factions. And when it comes to what we consider to be racism in this country, it's nothing compared to the shit that people are facing in other places where they're having their entire cultures wiped out. Like what the Buddhist monks are doing right now to Muslims out there in, Myanmar, I think? There are some places right now where people are being slaughtered, men, women, and children, and thrown off buildings. So when we start crying because we feel like we're singled out because of our color, you know, sometimes this is true, but it's okay for a person to feel like that they're being, you know, picked upon because of their race or singled out. It's not right for them to make everyone of the other race feel guilty because of it. And this is where we came up with terms like white guilt. I don't have any guilt for being white. I fight the same battles everyone fights. It may be easier for me in some ways, but it may be harder for me in some ways. It doesn't matter. It's about being an individual and taking accountability and action. Instead of blaming other races, a lot of folks I've met in my life who are white tend to blame the government for their problems. The government is the ultimate scapegoat. You see, when whites had more power over African Americans, then that built a resentment towards those white masters of the fields, and by calling themselves a master, you know, it's very insulting. And now in today's world, whites in this country don't have anybody to blame their problems on. And so the government becomes the scapegoat. And so it's everybody else is causing my problems instead of me taking accountability. So my point being that the world is hard for everyone. And yes, there is racism. Yes, there is corruption. And what do we do about it? Paying people money? Is that going to solve the problem? I don't know. But blaming somebody who's white because of what their ancestors did is also something that is not going to work. So those are just my thoughts on it. Hopefully I didn't come across as too, you know, hopefully I didn't come across as racist. Anyway, I'll talk to y'all later. Hope y'all have a wonderful day. And just remember, we're all in this together. This battle's a fucking tough one. We're all fighting it. So carry the lamp, carry the torch, share with others, and hope y'all have a wonderful day.